She furtively placed a sealed note on my door. No bell, no knock. Just a slight noise, as if someone didn't want to be seen. The sun hadn't even risen yet, but I saw the silhouette of a black luxury car glide out of the alley, the smell of cigarettes and lies lingering in the morning breeze. A familiar chill rose in my heart, like the first time I saw her scrutinizing gaze sweep across my yard. My hand tightened around the note, the black ink clearly printed like a declaration of war. But this time, I didn't stay silent. The person who thought he could manipulate the entire community had just made a wrong move. My name is David Collins, and I'm a 42-year-old carpenter who thought the biggest drama in my life would be choosing the right wood stain for our deck furniture. My wife Rebecca is 38, a decorated deputy sheriff with 15 years of law enforcement experience and a talent for seeing through lies that would make a polygraph machine jealous. We've been married for 12 years and living in our lakeside cabin for 5, enjoying what we thought was a peaceful retirement community. Then there's Karen Blackwood, 43 years old, with platinum blonde curls that never move in the wind, and a collection of red power suits that cost more than most people's cars. She moved into our neighborhood 18 months ago and immediately began her campaign to become HOA chairwoman, promising to elevate community standards and protect property values. What she really meant was that she planned to terrorize families into selling their homes so she could profit from a secret development deal that would destroy our quiet lakefront forever. I sit on the wooden deck of our lakeside cabin, watching the morning mist rise from the still water like ghosts from a forgotten battle. The coffee in my hands has gone cold, but I can't bring myself to move from this spot where so much of our fight began. It's been exactly 1 year since Karen Blackwood was led away in handcuffs, her red dress wrinkled and her perfect curls finally showing the strain of her collapsed empire. The community that once lived in fear of surprise inspections and arbitrary fines now enjoys a peace we'd almost forgotten was possible. But this morning, something shattered that peace. An envelope appeared in our mailbox with no return address, no postmark, just my name written in careful block letters across the front. Inside, a single line that made my blood run cold. She may have won, but the whole truth hasn't been told yet. I stare at the note, feeling that familiar knot form in my stomach, the same sensation I'd felt every time Karen's luxury sedan pulled into our driveway with some new violation to discuss. Rebecca's deputy badge sits in our bedroom drawer, gathering dust since her resignation 6 months ago. She said she needed a break from law enforcement after everything that happened, that she wanted to remember what it felt like to help people instead of constantly watching for corruption and lies. I understood completely. We both needed time to process what we'd been through, what we'd learned about power, greed, and the price of standing up for what's right when everyone around you just wants to keep their heads down. The sound of bare feet on the wooden deck breaks my thoughts. Rebecca emerges from the house, her auburn hair catching the early sunlight, carrying a fresh cup of coffee, and wearing that concerned expression I've come to know so well. "You've been out here for 2 hours," she says softly, settling into the Adirondack chair beside me. "What's eating at you this time?" I hand her the note without a word, watching her face transform from sleepy concern to that hard, focused look she used to get when working a case. "Any idea who might have sent this?" she asks, but we both know the answer isn't simple. There are still people in this community who believe Karen was the victim, who think we destroyed an innocent woman's life through some elaborate police conspiracy. But there are also people who know more than they've admitted, people who were part of something bigger than we ever imagined. The investigation that brought Karen down revealed a network of corruption, but we always suspected there were more players who managed to stay in the shadows. Rebecca reads the note again, her investigator's mind already working. David, what if this isn't a threat? What if someone's trying to tell us there's still more to uncover? She looks at me with those green eyes that can read people like open books. What if someone wants us to finish what we started? I know that look, and I know my wife. Despite everything we've been through, despite her resignation and her stated desire for a quiet life, she's never been able to walk away from injustice when it's staring her in the face. 6 months earlier, our life was everything we'd dreamed of when we bought this place. Rebecca would come home from her shifts at the sheriff's department, trade her uniform for jeans and a sweater, and we'd spend our evenings on the deck watching the sunset paint the lake in impossible colors. I'd work in my shop during the day, building custom furniture for clients who appreciated real craftsmanship, and Rebecca would tend our small garden when she wasn't fighting crime. Our biggest worry was whether to stain the deck furniture honey oak or weathered grey. That peaceful existence shattered on a Tuesday morning when a crisp white envelope appeared under our door like a snake sliding into paradise. Inside was a notice of violation from the Lakeshore Estates Homeowners Association, signed by Chairwoman Karen Blackwood in flowing script that looked like it belonged on a wedding invitation rather than a legal threat. The violation: improper placement of outdoor furniture affecting community aesthetic standards. The fine: $200. The furniture in question was a handmade wooden bench I'd crafted from reclaimed dock wood, positioned exactly where it had been for 3 years without so much as a sideways glance from previous HOA leadership. I remember Rebecca reading the notice aloud, her voice rising with each ridiculous detail. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in additional penalties and potential legal action for continued violation of community standards. She looked at me with that mix of disbelief and anger that would become all too familiar over the coming weeks. This is insane, David. We've never had any issues with the HOA before. Mrs. Patterson used to run things, and she was more worried about organizing the annual picnic than measuring the exact placement of people's patio furniture. We soon got our answer when Karen Blackwood herself appeared at our door that afternoon, arriving in a black Mercedes sedan that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. She stepped out wearing her signature red power suit, her platinum blonde curls styled in perfect waves that didn't move despite the lake breeze, and an expression of cold professionalism that made my carpenter's instincts scream danger. This wasn't someone coming to discuss a neighborly dispute. This was someone coming to establish dominance. "Good afternoon," she said, not waiting for an invitation before stepping onto our porch, her high heels clicking against the wood like a countdown timer. "I trust you received our notice about the furniture violation." Her voice was smooth and controlled, with just enough sweetness to make the underlying threat more apparent. She glanced around our property with the calculating gaze of someone appraising merchandise rather than admiring a home. Rebecca stepped forward, and I could see her jaw tighten in the way that meant she was fighting to keep her temper in check. "We did receive your notice, Ms. Blackwood, and we'd like to understand what changed. This bench has been here for 3 years without any complaints." Karen's smile was sharp as a blade, never reaching her eyes. "Standards evolve, Mrs. Collins. What was acceptable under previous leadership may not meet our current vision for community excellence." Her gaze drifted toward our garage, where Rebecca's marked patrol car was clearly visible through the open door. "I'm sure someone in your profession understands the importance of following established rules and maintaining order." The way she emphasized profession made it sound like an accusation rather than a statement of fact. Rebecca's hand instinctively moved toward her hip, a habit from years of wearing a duty belt, but she caught herself and crossed her arms instead. "Rules should be applied fairly and consistently to all community members," Rebecca said evenly, her deputy's training keeping her voice level despite the obvious provocation. "Has every lakefront property been inspected for furniture violations recently?" Karen's laugh was like ice cracking on the lake in winter. "Of course, Mrs. Collins. We're very thorough in our community oversight. However, some properties require more immediate attention than others." She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out another envelope, this one thicker than the first. "You'll find additional violations listed there. Grass height inconsistency, unauthorized flag display outside of designated patriotic holidays, and unapproved landscaping modifications." Rebecca opened the envelope with hands that trembled slightly, her face growing paler with each typed violation. "This is harassment," she said quietly. But Karen's expression didn't change. "This is community standards enforcement, Mrs. Collins. You have 48 hours to address each violation or face escalating penalties up to and including legal action for non-compliance." She turned to leave, then paused at the edge of our porch. "I do hope we can resolve this amicably. It would be such a shame if this beautiful property became the subject of ongoing legal difficulties." As she walked away, her red suit billowing behind her like a war banner, I felt something fundamental shift in the air around our home. War had been declared, and we didn't even know why. 3 weeks of escalating warfare followed Karen's first visit, each battle more absurd than the last. Every few days brought a new violation notice, each one carefully crafted to be just plausible enough to seem legitimate while being just ridiculous enough to make us question our sanity. We were fined $50 for having our American flag displayed on a Tuesday instead of only on federal holidays, despite the fact that 3 other houses on our street flew flags daily without penalty. We received a citation for planting roses in our garden without prior HOA approval, even though the community guidelines made no mention of flower restrictions. The most insulting violation came on a Thursday morning, a $75 fine for having our newspaper delivered to the aesthetically inappropriate side of our driveway. According to Karen's interpretation of community standards, newspapers should be placed on the right side of driveways only, for visual consistency throughout the neighborhood. When I walked around the community that afternoon, I counted 14 houses with newspapers on their left side driveways, none of which had received violations. By the 4th week, our total fines had reached $850, and Rebecca had reached her breaking point. I found her in our home office at midnight, surrounded by legal books, HOA documents, and county records, her laptop screen glowing with municipal websites and property law databases. "She's not just targeting us randomly," Rebecca said, without looking up from her research. "This is systematic, calculated, and it has nothing to do with community standards." "What do you mean?" I asked, settling into the chair beside her desk. Rebecca pulled up a county planning website and pointed to a highlighted section. 3 months ago, someone submitted a development proposal for our section of the lakefront. Look at the address specifications. My blood ran cold as I read the list of properties marked for potential acquisition. Our house was highlighted in bright yellow, along with 8 other lakefront homes. "She's trying to force us to sell," Rebecca continued, pulling up more documents. Look at this. Lakeshore Development Corporation filed paperwork with the county for a luxury resort project. Estimated value, $12 million. They need our properties to make it work, but they're planning to pay only 60% of market value by claiming the houses are distressed properties due to ongoing HOA violations. I stared at the architectural renderings showing a massive resort complex where our quiet neighborhood currently sat. She can't just force us to sell our homes, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I realized how naive they sounded. Rebecca's expression was grim. She can if she makes living here so miserable that we're desperate to escape. And if the property values drop due to ongoing neighborhood disputes, she can justify the lowball offers. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning that started like any other weekend until Karen arrived with reinforcements. I was in my workshop when I heard car doors slamming in our driveway, followed by official-sounding voices. Looking out of the window, I saw Karen stepping out of her Mercedes, followed by 2 sheriff's deputies and a man in a business suit carrying a clipboard and what appeared to be legal documents. Rebecca was in the shower, so I went to the door alone, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Good morning, Mr. Collins," Karen said with that sweet, poisonous smile. "I'm afraid we have a serious situation here. Your wife has failed to pay the accumulated fines, and we're here to begin asset seizure proceedings to ensure compliance with community standards." One of the deputies, a young man who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the situation, handed me an official-looking document with multiple stamps and signatures. "Asset seizure," I managed to stammer, scanning the legal language that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. "For HOA fines." Karen's smile widened like a predator sensing weakness. "Unpaid community assessments can result in liens and forced collection actions, Mr. Collins. It's all perfectly legal when residents refuse to respect community standards." The second deputy was already walking toward our garage, eyeing Rebecca's patrol car and my expensive woodworking equipment with the calculating gaze of someone making an inventory. That's when I heard Rebecca's voice behind me, calm and steady in a way that made everyone freeze in place. "Officers, I need you to stop right there and explain what's happening." I turned to see my wife standing in the doorway, her hair still damp from the shower, wearing jeans and a simple blue t-shirt, but carrying herself with an authority that seemed to fill the entire space around her. "Ma'am, we have a legal enforcement order for unpaid HOA violations," the first deputy said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried moments before. Something about Rebecca's presence had shifted the entire dynamic of the situation. Karen stepped forward, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Mrs. Collins, this is a legal matter that requires immediate resolution. If you'd simply paid your fines when they were issued, we wouldn't need to involve law enforcement." Rebecca's expression didn't change, but I could see the steel in her green eyes. "Officers, before you proceed, I need to see the court order authorizing this seizure." The young deputy looked confused. "Court order, ma'am?" Rebecca nodded slowly. "Asset seizure requires judicial approval. HOA violations are civil matters that must go through proper legal channels before any enforcement action can be taken." Karen's face was turning an interesting shade of red that almost matched her power suit. "The HOA has full authority to enforce community standards through appropriate measures," she said, her voice rising slightly. Rebecca reached into her back pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a gold badge that caught the morning sunlight like a mirror. Deputy Sheriff Rebecca Collins, badge number 4739. My wife said in a voice that could have cut through steel. I need to see the specific legal authorization for this seizure action. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the lake lapping against our dock 50 yards away. Karen's face went from confident red to confused white to terrified pale in the span of 3 heartbeats. Deputy Sheriff. The young officer stammered, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio. Mum, we weren't told. Dispatch said this was a routine civil enforcement. Rebecca's expression remained perfectly calm, but I could see the predator awakening behind her professional demeanor. Officer, what specific court order authorized you to seize private property for HOA violations? The second deputy was already backing away from our garage, his clipboard hanging forgotten at his side. Ma'am, we were told this was standard procedure for unpaid community fines. Rebecca stepped forward, her bare feet somehow making her seem more authoritative than Karen's expensive heels. There is no standard procedure that allows civil seizure without judicial review. What you're attempting to do here is illegal. Karen tried to regain control of the situation, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. Deputy Collins, you're using your position to intimidate legitimate community enforcement. Rebecca turned those green eyes on Karen with the focus of a laser beam. Ms. Blackwood, I'm not using my position for anything except preventing an illegal seizure of private property. These officers were lied to about their legal authority. The man with the clipboard, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, suddenly found his voice. Ma'am, I'm just here to inventory assets for potential collection. If there are legal issues, perhaps we should contact the county attorney's office for clarification? Rebecca nodded approvingly. That's exactly what should have been done before anyone showed up at our door with seizure papers. She turned back to the deputies, her tone becoming more collegial. Officers, I know you were following what you believed to be proper procedure, but HOA violations require civil court proceedings before any seizure can take place. Someone has provided you with incorrect information about your authority in this matter. The young deputy was already pulling out his phone. We should probably check with our supervisor about this. Karen watched a carefully orchestrated intimidation tactic collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. This isn't over, she said, her voice low and dangerous. You can't hide behind that badge forever. Rebecca's smile was colder than a January morning on the lake. Ms. Blackwood, I'm not hiding behind anything. I'm standing in front of it. And now I'm very interested in learning exactly how you convinced these officers that they had authority to seize private property without a court order. As the deputies made their phone calls and Karen retreated to her Mercedes for what appeared to be a heated conversation with someone on her cell phone, Rebecca placed her hand on my shoulder. David, this changes everything, she said quietly. What just happened here isn't about HOA violations anymore. This is about someone abusing the legal system and lying to law enforcement officers. The young deputy approached us after ending his radio call. Ma'am, our supervisor confirms that civil asset seizure requires court authorization. We're going to need to investigate how this enforcement action was initiated. Karen's Mercedes roared to life in our driveway, kicking up gravel as she sped away without another word. The man with the clipboard followed in his own car, leaving only the deputies and us standing in the sudden quiet of our front yard. Officers, Rebecca said formally. I'll be filing a complaint about this incident with your department and the county attorney's office. Someone deliberately misrepresented the legal authority for this action, and that someone needs to be held accountable. As the deputies drove away with apologies and promises of a full investigation, I realized that our quiet life by the lake was over forever. The war had officially begun. That afternoon, Rebecca transformed our dining room into a command center that would have impressed the FBI. Legal books covered every surface. Her laptop displayed multiple browser tabs of county records and HOA regulations, and a growing stack of printed documents threatened to topple onto the floor. "I should have done this weeks ago," she said, pulling up business registration records and cross-referencing them with property ownership databases. "I was trying to handle this like a normal neighbor dispute, but this isn't normal. What are you looking for?" I asked, settling into the chair beside her with a cup of coffee and the growing realization that my wife was entering full detective mode. "Connections," she replied without looking away from her screen. Karen didn't orchestrate this morning's fiasco alone. Someone with knowledge of law enforcement procedures fed her information about asset seizure. Someone with authority convinced those deputies they had legal standing for that action. For the next 4 hours, I watched Rebecca follow paper trails with the methodical precision that had made her one of the county's most effective investigators. She pulled corporate filings, traced business partnerships, and mapped financial connections with the focused intensity of a bloodhound following a scent. What she discovered made our harassment look like amateur hour compared to the sophisticated operation we'd stumbled into. "David, look at this," she said, turning her laptop screen toward me. Karen Blackwood filed incorporation papers for Enhanced Lakeshore Development Corporation 3 months before she started targeting us. But she's not the primary investor. She's listed as Development Coordinator and Community Liaison. The documents showed a complex web of partnerships involving companies I'd never heard of, all connected to a parent corporation called Grandview Resort Management. Rebecca pulled up more files, her excitement growing with each discovery. Grandview has been quietly buying lakefront properties across 3 counties using the same pattern. They move into a community, get someone elected to the HOA board, then use harassment and frivolous fines to pressure homeowners into selling below market value. She showed me newspaper articles from other communities where similar schemes had played out, always with devastating results for long-time residents. "But here's the really interesting part," Rebecca continued, opening another browser tab. 3 of the properties Grandview acquired in other counties were sold after the homeowners faced legal troubles related to civil enforcement actions that were later ruled illegal. My blood ran cold as I understood the implication. They're not just using HOA harassment, they're using false legal intimidation. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call that changed everything. Tom Peterson, the former HOA chairman who had been voted out the year before when Karen took control, called during breakfast with a voice that sounded tired but determined. "Mrs. Collins," he said, "I heard about what happened at your house yesterday. I think it's time we talked about what's really been going on in this community." When Tom arrived at our house that afternoon, he carried a cardboard box filled with documents, email printouts, and what appeared to be audio recording equipment. "I knew something wasn't right when Karen started her campaign to become chairwoman," he explained, settling into our living room with the weight of someone carrying a heavy secret. She had too much funding, too many supporters who had never shown interest in community affairs before. Tom opened his box like Pandora releasing the evils of the world. "So I kept records. Every meeting, every email, every suspicious phone call I could document. The evidence he had collected was more damning than anything we could have imagined. Email chains showing coordination with outside developers, financial records showing unexplained payments into Karen's personal accounts from shell companies connected to Grandview Resort Management, Most shocking of all were the audio recordings from HOA meetings where Karen had discussed problem properties that needed to be addressed through enhanced enforcement measures. Her voice was clear on the recordings, outlining strategies for pressuring specific families to sell, including suggestions for creative interpretation of community standards and coordination with legal enforcement partners. "She's been planning this for over a year," Tom said grimly, playing a recording where Karen discussed our property specifically. "Your house isn't the only target. She's got similar plans for the Johnson place, the Martinez family, and the elderly couple in the blue house at the end of the street. But you're the test case. If she can force you out, the others will be easy." Rebecca studied the documents with the methodical attention of a prosecutor building a case for trial. "Tom, this isn't just harassment or even fraud. This is conspiracy, extortion, and abuse of process. Why didn't you take this to the authorities sooner?" Tom's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Because Karen's brother-in-law is County Commissioner Bradley, and her development partner has connections throughout the sheriff's department." He looked at Rebecca meaningfully. "I needed someone with credibility and legal standing to make the case stick. Someone who couldn't be dismissed as a disgruntled former HOA chairman with an axe to grind." Tom paused, choosing his words carefully. "Someone like a deputy sheriff who's been personally victimized by the scheme and has the training to build an airtight case." The following Monday, Rebecca did something that shocked everyone, including me. She showed up at the scheduled HOA meeting wearing a sundress and carrying a plate of homemade cookies, looking like she was ready to join the local church auxiliary. "Karen," she said sweetly as she entered the community center where meetings were held, "I owe you an apology. I think we got off on the wrong foot and I'd like to start over." I watched from the back of the room as Karen's expression shifted from suspicion to cautious hope. "Well," Karen said slowly, "I'm always willing to work with community members who want to follow our standards." For the next 3 weeks, Rebecca played the part of the reformed neighbor perfectly. She attended every HOA meeting, volunteered for community events, and even complimented Karen on her strong leadership in front of other homeowners. To everyone watching, it looked like Rebecca had accepted defeat and was trying to make peace. But I knew better. Every night, Rebecca would come home and update her growing case file with new evidence of Karen's corruption, gathered from the inside, access her sudden cooperation had earned her. "She's getting sloppy," Rebecca told me after one particularly productive meeting. "When people think they've won, they stop being careful." The breakthrough came when Karen invited Rebecca to join the Vision Committee, a small group of HOA board members who made decisions about community development. "We need people with your unique perspective," Karen said during the invitation, clearly referring to Rebecca's law enforcement background. "Someone who understands the importance of order and proper procedures." Rebecca accepted graciously, not mentioning that she was already gathering evidence of the committee's improper procedures. During her first Vision Committee meeting, held in Karen's living room, Rebecca discovered just how deep the corruption went. "The Martinez family is proving stubborn," Karen was explaining to the committee, referring to our neighbors who had refused to sell despite months of harassment. "We may need to accelerate our timeline." She pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be architectural plans. "Grandview wants to break ground by spring, which means we need these properties cleared by December." Another committee member, a woman I recognized from the grocery store, asked about legal challenges. "What if they fight the fines?" Karen's laugh was cold. "Let them! Legal challenges take months, and legal fees add up quickly. They'll sell before it gets to court." Rebecca sat quietly through the entire meeting, taking mental notes and asking just enough questions to seem engaged without appearing suspicious. After the meeting, Karen walked Rebecca to her car, chatting about community improvements and the bright future ahead. "You know, Rebecca," Karen said as they reached the driveway, "I always knew you were a reasonable person. Sometimes people just need the right motivation to see things clearly." Rebecca smiled and nodded, playing her part perfectly. "I understand now that everything you've been doing is for the good of the community," she replied. "It takes vision to see the bigger picture." As Rebecca drove home, she knew she had everything she needed. Karen had just confessed to a conspiracy on what Karen didn't know was a recorded conversation, thanks to the recording app Rebecca had activated on her phone before entering the house. The end came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other HOA meeting. Karen had called an emergency session to discuss accelerated community improvements, which we all knew meant ramping up pressure on the remaining holdout families. She stood at the front of the community center in her trademark red dress, blonde curls perfectly styled, radiating the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. "Today marks a turning point for our community," she announced to the gathered homeowners. "We're going to discuss some exciting opportunities that will enhance property values and improve our quality of life." As Karen began her presentation about planned improvements and necessary property acquisitions, the community center doors opened. County Inspector Michael Torres entered, followed by 2 investigators from the district attorney's office. The room went silent as Inspector Torres approached the front of the room. "Ms. Blackwood," he said formally, "I have a warrant to audit the financial records of the Lakeshore Estates Homeowners Association, as well as a court order to freeze all HOA accounts pending investigation of fraud allegations." Karen's face went from confident to confused to terrified in the span of 5 seconds. "There must be some mistake," she stammered, but her voice had lost all its authority. Inspector Torres opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "We have evidence of financial impropriety, conspiracy to commit fraud, and abuse of fiduciary responsibility. This includes documented coordination with external development companies for personal gain, misuse of HOA funds, and illegal harassment of community members." As he spoke, one of the investigators began setting up a laptop and projector. "We'll be playing some recorded conversations that were submitted as evidence." The first recording was Karen's voice from the Vision Committee meeting, clearly stating her intention to force families to sell through harassment and illegal fines. The room erupted in angry voices as homeowners realized they'd been manipulated and lied to for months. Mrs. Johnson, the elderly woman who lived at the end of our street, stood up with tears in her eyes. "You've been trying to steal our homes," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "My husband and I have lived here for 20 years, and you've been trying to force us out so you could make money." Other voices joined in, sharing stories of harassment, unfair fines, and pressure to sell that suddenly made sense in the context of Karen's larger scheme. Karen looked around the room desperately, searching for allies who were no longer there. Her eyes finally landed on Rebecca, who had been sitting quietly in the back corner throughout the entire revelation. "This is all her fault," Karen said, pointing at my wife with a shaking finger. "She's been plotting against me from the beginning. She used her police connections to fabricate evidence." Rebecca stood slowly, and when she spoke, Her voice carried the calm authority that had made her such an effective deputy. "Ms. Blackwood," she said clearly, "I didn't fabricate anything. I simply documented the evidence of crimes you committed against this community." Inspector Torres stepped forward again. "Ms. Blackwood, you're being placed under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement of community funds, and abuse of official position." As the handcuffs clicked around Karen's wrists, her red dress seemed to lose its power, becoming just fabric on a woman who had finally been held accountable for her actions. The community center remained silent, except for the sound of her footsteps as she was led away. Rebecca and I watched from our seats, feeling not triumph but relief that the ordeal was finally over. That evening, Rebecca and I sat on our deck watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and orange. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a dark cloud had finally lifted. "How do you feel?" I asked her, knowing that despite the successful conclusion, the experience had changed both of us. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, watching a family of ducks paddle past our dock. "Tired," she said finally. "I never wanted to be the person who had to fight like that. I just wanted to live peacefully by the lake with my husband." Over the following weeks, the full extent of Karen's scheme became public knowledge. The investigation revealed that she had embezzled over $80,000 from HOA funds, had received illegal kickbacks from the development company, and had targeted 15 families for forced displacement. All of the fraudulent fines were cancelled, and the affected families received compensation from Karen's seized assets. The development deal with Grandview Resort was nullified, and our quiet lakefront community was safe from unwanted commercialization. But the victory came with costs that weren't immediately obvious. Some neighbors who had supported Karen still avoided us, uncomfortable with the reminder of how easily they'd been manipulated. Others treated Rebecca like a hero, which made her equally uncomfortable. "I wasn't trying to be anyone's savior," she told me one night. "I was just trying to protect our home." The weight of having to use her law enforcement training against a neighbor, even a corrupt one, had taken its toll. 6 months later, Rebecca submitted her resignation from the sheriff's department, saying she needed time to remember why she'd wanted to serve and protect in the first place. As I sit here now, 1 year later, holding that mysterious note about untold truths, I wonder if our story is really over. The note suggests there are still secrets, still people who played roles in Karen's scheme who haven't been exposed. But looking at Rebecca, who's found peace tending our garden and working part-time at the local library, I hope we've earned the right to let others carry on the fight if there is more to be discovered. We fought for our home and won. We stood up to corruption and saw justice served. Sometimes that has to be enough. Sometimes the real victory isn't in destroying your enemies, but in protecting what you love and maintaining your integrity while doing it. As the sun sets over our lake, I choose to believe that's victory enough for anyone.